So our sacristans here, our young people here, they do a little week of usually terror for them, where they have to serve as sacristan, and then they discover all the little details of how, how to fill oil, how to trim wicks, where to put books, what pages you're supposed to open, how to set up, how to be on time, and then what to do afterwards, where to put everything, how to restock, and all those kind of things. And then there's one very key area, which is probably the most important area for a sacristan, which is what you do with the used, so the corporal is the name of the square cloth that goes down on the altar, and the purificator is the one that you use for drying the chalice and the ciborium. So what do you do with those afterwards? Because that has obviously a much more sacred meaning, or you have to be much more careful with those. Why? Because they may have particles of Holy Communion or drops of the precious blood on them. So they have to be washed in a very particular way. So basically, they're put into a basin, they're soaked in water. And then that water isn't thrown down the sink or down the toilet. It shouldn't end up in a sewer, but it's poured back into the earth. So either onto a plant or onto grass or something like that. So it's just in case any drop of the precious blood or particle of the Eucharist came back in those cloths, they're cleaned in that fashion, and then afterwards they can be put into the washing machine. Why? Because we believe these things are sacred. So this is something very, very important to us, and something which we must always keep sight of as Christians and as Catholics. This idea of sacredness and reverence, the reverence due to sacred things. The reverence that we should have for sacred things. And we shouldn't really call the Eucharist a thing, but you get my point. He's a person, not a thing, but you get the issue. Okay. So the reverence that we should have. So because the Lord resides here, this is a place that deserves reverence. It's nothing to do with clergy versus laity versus anyone else. There is no verses here. It's everyone versus the chapel, in the sense that everyone towards the chapel. Everyone towards the tabernacle. Everyone towards the Lord. Because this deserves reverence. It's the Holy of Holies, the most sacred thing we have. So, take a couple of steps down from that. All sacred things, so even what we use for Mass, even vestments, chalices, patens, all these kind of things, these are sacred things. And it's good to understand what that means. They've received a special blessing, which means what? It means they're reserved for a sacred purpose. When something is blessed, it's reserved for a sacred purpose. So, if you have a blessed rosary beads, and I'm kind of a practical-minded person, so I have a rosary beads in my pocket, and at times, you'd know that rosary beads could be very good at maybe scraping a bit of wax off the altar. If you've got a flat base rosary, that would scratch it off, but I can't because it's a rosary beads. Or something is jammed in something. The rosary beads are actually fitting there, and I can't use a rosary bead, so because it's sacred. So it's a sacred thing, so it's reserved for a sacred purpose. Sacred things are reserved for a sacred purpose, right? But you've been baptized. You've been baptized. You've been blessed, if you will. You have been reserved for a sacred purpose. Much more than even sacred vessels that we use for celebrating Mass. Because you carry the Lord in a very, very different way. The Lord didn't come just to be present on an altar, to be put on sacred vessels, and then put back in the tabernacle. That's not the point of Mass. That wasn't the point of the Last Supper. It's that the bread and wine are consecrated, they become Him, and then we receive Him. That's part of Mass. The priest someone must receive. We should receive, everyone else should receive if they're in a state of grace. But the point being that the Lord consecrated the Eucharist so that He could live in us. That's the point. That's the point of it. Not just to reside in the tabernacle, but to reside in us. Because we've been reserved for a sacred purpose. And then one step down from that again is what we have today, the Feast of St. Blaise, where your troth is blessed. For those who wish, their troths can be blessed at this Mass. And what does that mean? That means that your troth, and maybe the organs slightly north of it, i.e. your tongue and that, are reserved for a sacred purpose, which means that now what comes out of our mouth should be holy. There's a lovely expression in Italian. They say the tongue doesn't have bones, but it can break them. The tongue doesn't have bones, but it can break them. So the tongue in and of itself is more or less kind of insignificant. Well, you can survive without it, I think. Yeah, you can. You can survive without your tongue. It makes a lot of things difficult, but whatever. But you can survive without it. But it can damage. In fact, if anything, most of the moral sufferings that people would have been caused by what other people have said. and maybe we've all experienced it, like someone who just says something cruel, or something who had the opportunity to say something nice and just went, oh. And just the vacuum when they could have, it's like a sin of omission. They could have said something nice, and then they knew that would have helped, but they chose not to. They saw someone was in need, someone was suffering, and they chose just to ignore them. So the tongue is very, very, very powerful. Our words are very, very powerful. The compassion that we can express, the support, the affirmation that we can express, the teaching that we can give, the consolation that we can give, all of this, most of it comes through our words. Part of it will come through our body language and other things, but most of it will come through our words, what we say. Because while body language does communicate something, words are much more precise. Words are much more hopefully indicative of what's going on in our heart, but we can be much more accurate. We can really kind of hone our attention to that particular person's issue or need or whatever it may be. So in virtue of this blessing of our throats, then our mouths, our words, are now reserved for a sacred purpose, which means they should be reserved for God. Which means you can still talk about football, you can still talk about soccer, and you can still talk about diesel engines versus petrol, and you can still talk about all these important issues. But ultimately, all should serve God. All should serve God. All that we do, all that we say should serve God. Even in normal conversation, even if we're just talking about useless things, the point is I'm now engaging with you in conversation. Why? Because I want to show you that I'm willing to give you my time, because you're important to me. So that's the purpose of it. Even they might just be talking about golf. The purpose is I'm spending time with you because I care. So even talking about golf can still be, like if you will, almost a sacred action. But never quote me on that. but you get the point, okay? That my words are now an expression of love. The content, what we're talking about, is irrelevant. It's the fact that it's my time. That's what I'm giving. So all of these things, like as I say, we've been baptized, which means we're reserved for God. We're reserved for a sacred purpose. Our throats have been blessed. So now our words are reserved for a sacred purpose. They're reserved for God. Our whole bodies, in virtue of our baptism, have been reserved for God. So we ask the Lord today, through the prayers and intercession of St. Blaise, Bishop and Martyr, as we receive the blessing of our throats now, to help us be much more aware of what we're doing and of, if you will, the responsibility that goes along with this. Lord, help us to glorify you in all of our words, that everything that comes out of our mouths might praise you. Amen.